Greetings and welcome to another installment from the Patchwork Productionz Learn to Crochet for Beginners series. In this video, you will learn how to make straighter edges while working in the row. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Stitch, and Patchwork Productionz is all about learning and doing crochet. So make sure you subscribe so you never miss another installment. Without further ado, let's get started. So, this tutorial will be a short, quick, simple tutorial that will teach you two new techniques for working in the row and having your edges be a little bit more straight. Now, I will say that just as a note, just because your edges might not look straight, does not necessarily mean that you've done something wrong. Of course, you always want to go back and check to make sure that you have the right number of stitches and that everything according to the pattern or what you're designing is okay. But the fact that your edges are not straight is not necessarily bad, because in many cases you can just put a border and it won't be a problem. But if you have a project that is just going to be that when it's done, no border, and you want to have the edges look nice, there are a few techniques that we can do. As you can see here, I've made a small swatch, 10 stitches across, and I've used two different techniques for working these stitches. I've used the one that is traditional, where this is the double crochet, and so at the bottom here we see that I treat the turning chain as a stitch, and whenever I move from row to row, I skip that first stitch because the turning chain counts as one, so that's how I have 10. So if I count these, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the same for this row and this row. I did 3 rows like that. And so that's how you traditionally do it. Some people don't like this because while it can get pretty straight edges, there are these holes from the turning chain, that space. Now, I have sort of lessened that. This is a tip for you. One way that you can lessen this is if you do one chain shorter than what you normally would. For the double crochet, traditionally you do a turning chain of 3. In this case, I did a turning chain of 2, and so it's not as bad, but it's still visible, so some people don't like that. And then up top here, these top 3 rows that I did it the other way, which is I do a turning chain, which I still did a turning chain of 2, but that turning chain does not count as a stitch. So I double crochet 10 stitches, and then you have the turning chain. And what this does is leave these bumps on the side from the turning chain that's left behind. Now, I also lessened the bump because I did a turning chain of 2 as opposed to 3, but it is still there. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you can move in the row that will have straight edges and will avoid having this hole. I will be doing it all in double crochets because primarily you face these problems with double crochet, treble crochet. I guess you can sometimes say half double crochet, less so the single crochet, but the techniques can be applied to any of the elementary stitches, but I'll demonstrate them all in double crochet. So the first technique I'll teach you is actually the easier of the 2 techniques, and basically it is mostly the same as what you would do for the second way that I showed you here. So basically, I'm just going to begin. I'm going to do turning chain of 2, and we are going to insert our hook into the first stitch there. So we're not going to skip a stitch. We are going to make our turning chain, and then we are going to work into that first stitch. And that's kind of how we get that bump, but we'll see how that's rectified at the end of the row. So we're almost at the end here. So let's just count our stitches to make sure we have the right amount, and our turning chain's not going to count as a stitch. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now for this last stitch, this is where things get interesting. For this method, what we're going to do is we're actually going to make 2 double crochets, but we're going to join them. So the top stitch will only be 1. So if we count our V's, we're going to have 10 stitches. But if we were to count the posts, we would get an extra stitch. It would be 11. So let me show you how you do this. Basically, you begin the double crochet like normal, but just before finishing the last step, we're going to make another double crochet. So we've started to, and if we finish this, that's a double crochet, but before we do that, we're going to begin another double crochet, and we're going to make it. And now we're here where we have 3 loops left on the hook. We're going to go through all 3 loops. And so what we've done is we've made 2 of these double crochets, but at the top we joined it into 1. Let me do that again slowly so that you can see. So basically we're going to begin making a double crochet just like normal. And then just before we finish the last step, so we have 2 loops left on the hook, we're going to yarn over but begin another double crochet. So we're going to insert back into that same stitch. And we're going to begin another one. Draw through 2, and now we have 2 incomplete double crochets. We have 3 loops left on the hook, and so we're going to yarn over and draw through all 3. And so by posts, we have more stitches. We have, not including the turning chain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But if we count our stitches, what we're going to be working into, the V's I should say, if we count the V's, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because we joined these 2 double crochets together at the top. And so what this method does is it adds an extra double crochet to fill in that space of the bump that used to be there, and so the edge looks straight. I will finish 2 more rounds like this, or 2 more rows like this, and then I will show you what the final result looks like. Okay, so this is the final product of the last 2 rows that I've done, and as you can see, this method makes the edges a lot more straight than they would be normally with the bumps, because that extra double crochet on each side fills in what would be that space, and so the edges are much more straight and look much better, and you don't have that hole. So let me demonstrate for you again how this would work. To move to the next round, you just do it the same like you normally would. Chain 2, turn your work, and then in this case we're not skipping a stitch, we're just inserting directly into that first stitch, and then when you get to the other side you would make your 2 double crochets. So we'll skip over to that. And so now here at the end, all you have to do is begin a double crochet, but before you finish it, you work into that same stitch again and make another double crochet, and then you have 3 loops on the hook and you join them all together. And so there we have this method to make our edges a lot straighter. And this is the easier of the methods. Now of course this works for any of the other stitches as well. So if you're doing the treble crochet, it's the same idea. You just make 2 of the stitch in the end, but join it. So before you finish the treble crochet, before you draw through that last loop that would finish the stitch, you begin another one in the same stitch until you have 3 loops left on the hook, and then you pull it through all 3. So it's the same principle for any of the elementary stitches. The second technique is a little harder to do. It's slightly more advanced, but I'll show you how it's done. It is called the chainless double crochet, and I would presume that applying this technique to say the treble crochet would make it the chainless treble crochet. But the idea behind this technique is that you don't chain, you just turn your work, and what you'll do is you'll make this loop here about the height of a double crochet or whatever stitch you're doing, and then you'll proceed to do something very interesting here. So you're gonna take your finger and you're going to hold the top of the loop so that it doesn't slide around on your hook. You're going to then wrap your hook around the back, still holding that loop, and you're going to draw this loop. You're going to draw a loop underneath. So if you can see there, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm drawing that loop right underneath. So it'll look like this. Now you have two loops, and now you yarn over and draw through both loops. So this is called the chainless double crochet, and as you can see, I've begun with this stitch here, chainless double crochet. And so let me just demonstrate this again. When you get to the next row, we're going to turn our work, make this loop about the size of a double crochet. We're going to loop it around while holding this loop so it doesn't slide around. We're going to bring this yarn and we're going to just bring it through that hole right around the underside here, and got to make sure that this doesn't slip. So now we have this, and we pull through here. So this is a stitch replacement. It looks more like a double crochet, and it makes your edges a little bit more flat, so more straight edges. So I'm going to work across the row here and work some rows of this so you can see what the final product looks like. So I have finished 3 more rows actually to demonstrate something to you. So this method is the chainless double crochet, and it does make straighter edges, but there are some things to note about this. Number one, if you do make it, just be aware that if you skip that first stitch like you might do traditionally, you'll still get spaces, although the edge will be nice and straight as you can see here, but you'll still get those spaces. So that's one thing to note. Number two, depending on how loosely you do the chainless double crochet, these strands can hang out from the sides and make it appear as though all of your efforts were in vain. So when you make the chainless double crochet, although it's challenging, you may need to practice to do it a little tighter, a little more concise, so that you don't have these extra loops hanging out, because then it defeats the purpose of making this edge look straight. But you see on this side, I did a lot better keeping those stitches together, and so the edge looks very good. So I'm going to demonstrate for you again what this looks like. This is the chainless double crochet. Basically, instead of chaining and turning your work, you're just going to turn your work, and with your loop about the height of a double crochet, you'll hold the loop here, wrap your hook under. You're going to bring this yarn through the bottom, and then you have 2 loops here. You're going to draw through both of those loops, and so this is the chainless double crochet. And now you're going to go across the row And of course we have to insert into that first stitch if we don't want to have that space. And so I'll show you what you do at the end. So here at the end it's nothing special, but you'll have to find that stitch that has the V at the top from your chainless stitch, and you'll have to work into it. So let's count our stitches here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I should have 11, but there's another stitch to work into which would make this 12. And so this is the other thing to note about this stitch. Because that chainless double crochet acts as a stitch, it acts as a double crochet, it is a double crochet, your stitch count may be a little off because I started with 10, and because I didn't skip a stitch I got 11, but the next stitch I added another one, I got 12. So in this one here it's kind of off. So it is something to note that if you're not careful with this, you can add stitches in different places. So just be careful with this this technique. It's a little harder and it can be a little confusing, but it definitely makes the edges much straighter. So that is the last technique. Something to note with any of these techniques, as opposed to the traditional way of doing it, your project will be slightly wider because those turning chains and extra stitches that aren't actually in the count are just on the side. And so your project will be ever so slightly wider than if you do it traditionally, where your turning chain counts as a stitch and then you skip the first one. Every other method will cause your project to be slightly wider. But other than that, these are the basics, simple techniques that you can use if you're interested in making your project straighter, but also nothing to fret over if your project doesn't have straight edges, because most times you can just fix it by adding a little border, even if it's just slip stitches, something simple, and so that won't be seen. But if you want to have the project stay straight, you can use any of these two methods shown, either the chainless double crochet or making 2 double crochets but joining them at the top. I actually like this method quite a bit myself, but there are some techniques for you to have some straighter edges. So for now, that will be all for this video. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this tutorial and want to learn more about crochet, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up, and also share this video with your friends and family or on social media. And feel free to leave a comment down below. If you have any questions or suggestions or any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, catch you later.